one thing about our group, we sure laugh a lot, and that's what makes it so much fun. I have started here, it doesn't matter if you can see this is to help me become guided in what I want to talk about. But I want to go back all the way to 1867. That was the year of Confederation, and also that was a year that a Mr. W.T. Leonard purchased the property, and it was referred to as Lot 1. So he picked a really good year to get things on the roll. Now, 7 years later, Lakefield became incorporated as a village. So it just turns back the time to give you an idea of how far back this goes. Now, starting in 1875, the building, the brick building, was built by Mr. W.T. Leonard on what is now 21 Queen Street. And because he was a contractor, he built it all on his own. So that would go to his specifications. Now, what I would like to do, though, is also fill you in a little bit more about what he did behind the store. If you're walking along Regent Street and you go from the store towards where the parking lot for the store is now, Mr. Leonard had also bought or built 2 houses right in there, which were both destroyed by fire in the 1900s. But 2 of the occupants of these houses were Mr. and Mrs. James Long and Mr. and Mrs. Dutchy Stone. Mr. Stone was the first Salvation Army man who lived in the district. So that just gives you a little bit of background about that there had been something in there, and I'm sure that when we come across old photos at some point, we'll see some other buildings and wonder what they were. In 1901, Mr. W.T. Leonard died, and as a result, those buildings went to Mr. William Wesley Leonard, which we will refer to as WW. And he married Laura Leonard. And we had a picture of her here recently with her family. I think the family name was Hamilton?
Edwards.
Edwards, well, close enough, yeah. So, yeah, I will. I'm always getting in trouble, yeah. Now, the 2 sons were William Wesley Leonard and Wilbert Kenneth Leonard. So they're the second generation now that we're getting to. Now, Wilbert Kenneth Leonard, he had learned about the printing program and business from J.W. Ridpath, and he enjoyed that so much that he moved on to Chatham and then to Detroit. And as a result of that, he sold his portion of the business to his brother, William Wesley Leonard, WW. So we go from WT to WW. Now, at this point, William Wesley Leonard is the sole owner. And then we get into an interesting thing about the history of the store. And what I want to do is just kind of take you up to the point that WW got the store. When the store was built, it was built as 2 separate buildings with a solid wall between it. And in 1875, the portion of the store that has the Queen Street entrance was first used as a dry goods store. And it was run by a Mr. Medill. And actually, Mr. Medill and his 2 brothers, John, Lewis, and Joe. So they had this store for a few years, and then Roland Johnson, he also ran it as a dry good business. But also in that store as a dry good business, he had a millinery department, and he also had a dressmaker who would take the material and make a dress for the ladies. And she was on the 2nd floor of the building, and her name was Miss Hattie Northey. So the upstairs had a life too. Now, after the Medills and the Johnsons ran the dry goods store, They then left the business, and Mr. Leonard, now wondering what to do with that building, decided to turn it into a movie theater. So, in the 1920s, the Queen Street Theater was born. It was a movie picture film theater with only silent films, so they had to have local piano players and violinists. And I had the joy of talking to a Mr. Warren Payne, who also had a store in Lakefield. And I talked to him near the end of his life, and we were reminiscing on his veranda. And it turned out that Mr. and Mrs. Payne were the ones that played the music for the silent film series. But the funny thing about it was that Mrs. Leonard, being very religious, insisted that only music played in church would be used. So I'm sure there must have been some very interesting interpretations to a Western. But Mr. Payne said, yes, they really had some challenges trying to get through that. So then, in 1928, the theater closed because we were then moving into talking pictures. So at this point, we got to the 1920s. Well, now, meanwhile, on the other half of the building, when it was first built, it started as a grocery store. And that grocery store was owned by, actually it was run by Mr. Cox. Was that the name, I think? Yeah, just a second till I get my notes. TJ, that would be the one, yeah. Yes, Tom Cox ran the grocery store. Well, things went along tickety-boo until 1902, and that part of the store then became the Traders Bank, and it was managed by a Tom Benson. So the money business went okay for about 3 years, but then in 1905, I'm sure Mr. W.W. Leonard said, well, that's it. I think it's about time I put my foot in the door too. So he turned that side of the store that's on the corner of Regent and Queen, he turned that into a hardware store. At the same time, he's leasing out the other part for businesses to continue on.
Albert and Queen?
I'm sorry, that's where I live. Queen and Regent, that's right. What? Albert. Okay, thank you. I love it when I get more information that's correct. That's great. Okay, now. Oh, I know, that was it, yes. That's right, I don't get out much. Now, in 1928, the theater closed, as I said, and it became a store run by two men. First of all, they ran the business together, and it became a barber shop and a shoe store all in one. Mr. Earl Edwards ran the barber shop, while Mr. Glenn Wanamaker sold and repaired shoes. So they had a jolly good time there. Now, as life went on with the Leonard family per se, we get now to this is at the time then when Mr. Leonard decided that he had his business store too. So now we're going to move right along to the 1930s. And in the 1930s, Mr. Leonard found that after the other side, the movie theater was gone, he took a major step, and he decided he was going to take over the whole store. And that's what he did. He did it. He sure did. Anyways, he took over the whole store, and it had that solid wall between it. So he cut an arch so that you could go in one door and just go under the arch and go over to the other part. Well, interestingly enough, the war was coming, and in 1939 to 1945, his hardware business was really suffering because there were so many supplies that were needed for the war effort. So to get around that, he decided to leave just the one side, the south side, for the hardware store, and then use the north side as a gift shop. So at that point, it became one half china and gifts, and then the other half was hardware. So Mrs. Laura Leonard, she ran the gift shop, and she would go to Toronto and purchase gifts to the shows to be sold in the store. So that's how that all started from the very beginning to having it all under the same family taking charge of it all. Now at this time, another person...
How about getting Len to hold the thing up so we can see it?
Well, it's written so small, I don't know if you can
I
see
can hang
it.
on to it.
Well, okay, all right. Now,
I get over it.
yeah.
I don't like to see him sitting there doing nothing.
Well, no,
Thank
that's
you.
so right. I really
You're so
appreciate,
right.
that's really a very important issue that I've always worried about, yes. Okay, now, notice I've talked about the north side and the south side, but I want to fill you in a little bit more on the upper part of the floor. It was used as council chamber, and then it was used as a meeting room for the general public for any concerns that came along. And after that, it was used to run a printing press that was run by Mr. Milner. And Mr. Milner had taught Mr. J.W. Ridpath the printing trade. So it wasn't really the business up there, but that's where the press was. That's where all the words were spewed out. And then it became an office for Judge O.A. Langley.
30 days or $30.
So, 30 days or $30, that was the decision he made. It was also during World War II, part of it was used as a Red Cross, for the Red Cross ladies to do the supplies and the things that they would send over for the war effort. So they had a part of that. And then the big hoo-ha, for 45 years, it was the Independent Order of Oddfellows had their lodge upstairs there. And I even remember as a little girl walking upstairs with my dad, and I wasn't really allowed to go up those big steps, and I'd peek in the door. It would be really dark, but you'd see the big colored balls, red and blue, and you'd see this big carved chair. So that's the closest as I got to know what the Oddfellows did. But it sure looked pretty spectacular. So up to that date, that tells you about the upstairs and the two sides. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more people stuff, now that we've got the lay of the land here and what the stores were doing. In 1946, Mr. W.W. Leonard died. And then the business was turned over to his son, Jack. Now, Jack was 36 years of age at the time. And also, there was another son, Ted. Ted married Margaret Leonard. Now, Ted died in 1955. So I just want to read you a little bit about what was said by Mrs. Laura Leonard about the family at that point. W.W. Leonard had two sons, William Edwards, called Ted, and Frederick John, called Jack. Ted was interested in mining and spent most of his time in northern Ontario and Quebec. He also worked on the Kitimat project in BC and was temporarily working for the same company as a superintendent on the St. Lawrence Waterway when in 1955 he met with a fatal accident. So that left Brother Jack. And Brother Jack had worked for his father while Jack was going to high school. And so then he took over his father's business in 1946. That's where we are. So, Jack was having quite a good time adding all different kinds of Hardware to the store. And there was a magazine that came out at this time, and in it, it wrote a little bit about the hardware store in Lakefield. And the magazine was called The Hardware and Metal. I'm sure you all have copies of that at home. So this one is from June 1953. This is the article. Leonards Hardware Store at Lakefield, Ontario is in a village that does its best to attract tourists and to make their stay in the community a happy one. Jack Leonard, the 40-year-old bachelor, proprietor of the store, is one of the number of merchants who are doing splendid work looking after the needs of summer visitors and also looking after the needs of their village and farm customers all during the year. Living his father before him, Jack proved himself a good, just like his father before him, Jack proved to be a good businessman. And the business mainly was in the summer months, but Leonards Hardware continued to do a good business during the entire year. One reason is that the store is a friendly store where merchandise is of top quality at fair prices. Last year, Jack Leonard enlarged the frontage of his store, giving him more space, in addition to having attractive window space almost doubled. The store is very roomy, and often when the male tourists are buying fishing tackle or hardware, their wives are browsing about the store buying chinaware or other gift items to take home. So that was a lovely write-up in this magazine about Lakefield and the hospitality of the people in general. So there we go up to this time of between 1946 up to about 1950. And then another little switch happened. And it had to do with someone very near and dear to my heart, Robert Clare McCracken, known as Bobby. Bobby was my father, and he was born in 1921 and passed away in 1922. As a teenager, Bob...
Whoa, Sandy.
Oh, 1992, poor lad. I wonder how I got born. Well, I tell you, wonders never cease. As a teenager, Bob...
You made it sound so convincing.
Oh, yes. I think tomorrow's my first eye appointment.
You can fool some of people sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true, yeah. So as a teenager, Bobby worked in the store, and when the war started, he enlisted in the Air Force. And at that point, he was having a very exciting life in the Air Force. He first started his training in Halifax and was trained to do low-level flying along looking for submarines. So this kept him very, very busy. And it was also at that point that at this base there was a nurse, a lovely, young, vibrant nurse by the name of Eileen Armstrong. Eileen had been given the job this one day of delousing a patient. This patient had huge, long hair with as many bugs called cooties that you can ever imagine. So my father, who had met her, decided he would nickname her Cootie. Well, she got stuck with that name, and after a while, they became engaged. And my father then was sent over to England and stationed there doing midnight missions over in Germany with a Spitfire. So Bobby alone in the Spitfire makes you understand how Bobby alone driving a blue truck through Lakefield means you jump out of the way. And during one of his midnight raids, the plane, he was bombing some trains, and his plane blew up in flames. and he ejected out, and he parachuted out and landed in a tree. And when he got himself unscrambled, he ran straight through the woods into a Gestapo headquarters in Germany. Now I know why I can't find my way out of a paper bag. And once he was captured, he was forced to walk for a week on bare feet with very little food during the time. And they took him to this prisoner of war camp, which was in northern Germany. And they put him in solitary confinement, and at least 3 times a day, they would literally torture him and try to get information from him, and the only thing he would say was his name. So at one point, they took a rifle butt and they knocked out his front teeth. Now, after a while, they figured that they weren't getting much from this Bobby, whoever he was. So they put him in one of the huts in the prisoner of war camp. And recently, in the last few years, I was at the War Museum in Ottawa, and I came across 4 different history books that have stories about my father. And one of the books, which I had not seen before, extremely interested me, and it was called The Cradle Crew. It's called The Royal Canadian Air Force World War II. This book was written by one of the prisoner of war airmen in this camp of 9,000 people. It was just strictly for the Air Force prisoners of war. And it just so happened that Bobby ended up in the same hut that the author of this book was in. And the author told the tales of all of the people that happened to be in that particular hut. So there are some very interesting passages about Bob McCracken. But the greatest interest was when I turned to a page, and you can't really see it, but I just want you to show that it has a lot of lines and squigglies around it. What it is, in fact, is it is a diagram of the layout of hut number 13. And when I look at it and I see that one of the beds is labeled for Bob McCracken, it really brings it all back to life. So they had a horrific scenario going through this prisoner of war camp. But when the war was over, he returned. I have his logbook, which is absolutely priceless. He would put in his escapades and add little comments. And if you knew Bobby at all, Bobby just loved life, and he was just get up and go. And on the back page of his logbook, there's a page for reprimands. And Bobby got a reprimand on one particular day because when he came and landed his Spitfire, he just raced down that runway. And what did he do? He smashed into a lorry. Well, glory be, the lorry or the truck got damaged. So they said that Bobby was overconfident. But I can't imagine being a Spitfire pilot and being meek and mild, or you would never be up there. So when Bobby returned, he went to Montreal just after the war, and he married Eileen Armstrong in Montreal, and those that stood up for them were Sybil and Skipper Bean. Sybil Bean being the sister of my mother. And during the war, I forgot to mention that when I was at the War Museum, they had the newsreels in black and white, and they were showing the planes taking off over on a midnight raid in Germany. And lo and behold, there went a Spitfire, and on the side of it is painted the word Cootie. So guess whose plane that was? He made a model, and I have the model plane of the Spitfire with Cootie on the side. So when they arrived back in Lakefield, they were married June the 12th, 1945. And as soon as he came back, he went and worked at the hardware store again. And he worked with Jack Leonard. Well, Bobby went for up to 1945, 46, and then he decided that he was going to travel for a hardware company. And during that time, he did a lot of traveling, and he would go all around the area in Ontario and selling the merchandise for Walter Wood's company that was stationed or situated in Hamilton. But that lasted for maybe about 4 years, and it was time to settle down now that he had a little daughter that was running around in circles. So when he came back in 1951, he joined with Jack, and Jack Leonard and Bob McCracken became partners of the store. And that went on until 1951, and now just a second, ahead of myself. Okay. Oh yeah. In 1951, when he did come back, he set up a formal partnership with Jack Leonard, and that went on until 1960, when Jack died very tragically and very suddenly, and it was a very big blow. So after the death of Jack, Bob purchased the other part of the partnership, and this money was paid to Mrs. Laura Leonard. And so from 1960 on, that store was associated with Bob McCracken. But Bob decided to keep the name of the store still as Leonard's because it had such a good name for it. Sometimes one of the signs over the store would say Leonards Hardware, and then it would say R.C. McCracken underneath it. And we used to call him R.C.
R.C.
Oh, we loved him though. And then, starting in 1977, Bob decided to retire, semi-retire. I'm sure you heard about the dynamite business that he had. Glory be if you were ever near any of those scenarios. I remember, who's the name of the fellow that, is it Jim Jones that lives in Young's Point that
No,
worked for Chex?
Gary Jones.
Gary Jones, yeah.
Oh no, that'd be
Gary
bad
Jones
mix.
had said that.
That'd be bad
Okay,
mix.
yeah, Gary was going to be doing, filming a commercial for Chex TV. And for whatever reason, they needed to have something blowing up. I don't know the story. There was going to be a hole burned up, and I guess Dad put lots of dynamite in it because it shattered the windows and Gary's truck. Anyways, Gary laughs about that every time he thinks of that. So when my father retired in 1977, he sold the hardware business part. He sold that off, but he continued from then on to own the building itself. So starting in 1977, there were several other people who continued to run their own hardware business in that store. And then in 1992, Bob passed away, and then the building was passed on to his daughter, me. And at the time, it was really quite run down, and it had several unfortunate things happen to it inside, and a lot of things were destroyed, which was very upsetting. But I decided, just because of the love of Lakefield and the love of the memories I had with the store, that I would try and refurbish the store to the best of my financial ability. The bank and I. So that's what happened. I renovated the outside and I renovated the main floor. And as soon as that was done, that took about 2 years. And the only part that I didn't touch was upstairs. So the store then was leased to the Vandermarks, and they ran their own hardware store there. And in 2002, I sold the store. It was a very difficult thing. It was sort of a breaking of the final strings with the family. But I knew I had lots of really good memories to it for there. And I'm happy to see that at least the top floor now is being renovated and kept up, and I think being turned into apartments. So the next thing that I would like to just talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's pretty, that's it.
That's finished.
Yeah, that's
Thank you,
finished.
Len. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fine job.
Something to lean on.
I would just like to give a few personal memories of Leonards Hardware. And it has to do with me growing up in the hardware family with my father. And this was another article that was printed about the things that were sold in the hardware store. And this article said, this store has household appliances, paint, wallpaper, Finley's electric ranges, heaters, and stoves. The Leonards used to be the oldest agents of Finley Brothers, Carlton Place, handling the stoves, and they continued to sell them right to the present. So that was something that was just kept on as a tradition. And when my father had worked as a salesman, he knew good hardware. And he never wanted to throw anything out. Now I know where I got that from, because you could go to that hardware store and it did not matter what you asked for. If you stayed long enough and looked in every nook and cranny, you would find it for sure. One of the memories I have is that there were 2 holes in the floor when you entered through the door that was on the corner there. And there was just at the top of the holes a piece of chain that was hooked to a rod, and then a piece of rope. So people would come in and they would like to purchase so many yards, feet, whatever, of, let's say, rope. My father would pull the rope, open the door, walk up Queen Street, and he had measured distances along the way in Queen Street so he would know how many feet that was to there, etc., etc. I've had the joy of talking to a few people from the Toronto area who have said, I was sort of cleaning out my basement and I found tons of rope, but it was only because I love to watch your father go and measure the rope. So that was really great fun. And it was just a little, yeah, Dad would do something a little bit different. I also remember that it was an extremely friendly place to visit. It was like the hub of the village. Everybody had to go in there sometime during the day to get the latest news. And Bob was always very accommodating. He was just a wonderful people person. And the thing was that he was also a volunteer fireman, like a lot of people that were in the village here. And so when that fire alarm went, out went Bob across the road to the fire station, and someone else would be in the store looking after it. But his duty to his community was always there. And the almighty dollar didn't stay in the way. The heck with the sale, I gotta go put out a fire. He also, as we all know, loved to cut glass. And the glass was cut in the basement. And the most popular time to go and help cut glass was Christmas Eve. Because that's where you went, and with a little bit of Christmas cheer. I don't ever recall any glass ever being cut, and maybe it's just as well, or someone would have lost a finger. So that was a tradition that seemed to go. Everybody went to the store Christmas Eve to cut glass. Oh yes. But another thing I always remember growing up about Christmas Eve, every single Christmas Eve, maybe around 10 o'clock, there would always be a phone call. Oh my God, Bob, oh my God, guess what? I forgot to pick up the doll for my daughter. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So Dad would put on his pants over his PJs, drive down to the store, get the present that was supposed to be from Santa for someone. And that always happened. And that he wanted to make sure that somebody was happy on Christmas Day. And I just remember that being just, just a common thing. Another thing too was you went to buy an appliance. When the day was done, Dad would load that on the truck and go and deliver it and set it up. That was just part of the service. He was always giving time and going beyond just to help someone. So this was at no charge whatsoever, but it was his joy to be able to do that for people. And I remember that. Another thing I also remember is that I desperately wanted to work in that store when I was in high school. Me? Where else are you going to meet guys? They have to come in and buy hardware. So, Dad fixed me on that. Guess where I was? I was in the china department, and I dusted, and I washed fine china, and I dusted. I never got to see the other side of that store, and trust me, if your father owned the store, you worked 10 times harder. He wasn't easy. He made sure that it wasn't just an easy ride for me. So maybe that's why I'm not so keen about dusting nowadays. Another thing he had started in the hardware, or in the gift section, was he did have some beautiful fine china, crystal and fine dishes and figurines. And in those days, and this was in the 60s when I was working there in the summer, he'd have like the cup and saucer of the month, and it would be a certain pattern, and everybody loved to come and do the collection. I can tell you what everybody got those years as wedding gifts and shower gifts: cups and saucers, teapots, and dishes. And I learned to put them in the box, put this, and gift wrap them and make little bows. And it was extremely busy in the summer doing that. Another thing that was quite noticeable was that there'd be two kinds of tourists that would come. There would be the American tourists, and they were basically from the Buffalo area. Maybe it's just because I got used to their accent. And they loved fine china. Maybe they couldn't get it to the quality down there. Well, I wrapped them, and I'm sure I continued in my sleep to wrap cups and saucers and dishes for them to take back. And there was also a big contingent of tourists from the Toronto area. It was an extremely busy time because it was also before Highway 134 started. So that gives you an idea of how it was just non-stop coming through. And with the other hardware store here at the time, which was run by Archie Stewart, everybody was quite busy. So it was that special time that just isn't the same quite now. Also, Dad had what we called open accounts. He had everyone's name of people that would come in. Talk about a trusting soul, God bless him. You would come in, you could put something on the account, and if you didn't have the money, you were not threatened. That was okay. He knew that down the line, sometime, some year, you would eventually pay it back. And you would never close an account for you that way. So he loved the community and treated them, I thought, very, very well. And isn't that just like Lakefield days gone by? I also remember that one thing my father loved to do was dress up in costume. Oh my goodness, what a character. I recall that when they had dances at the Lakefield Memorial Hall, this was at a point when he was in partnership with Jack Leonard, and Jack was a bachelor. So Jack, for some reason or other, went over to the dance, and my father dressed up as this gorgeous blonde and went and flirted the entire evening with poor Jack, who just did not know from what had ever happened. And Bob continued his love of dressing up and doing things like that, and whenever there was a parade in the summer or a Santa Claus parade, Bobby would be in it, whether it was the blue truck with stuff or whether it was me sitting in the trailer that had a boat on it and whatever. He just loved doing that. The more the merrier, that was his idea. So I felt that that was just part of Lakefield, that he added a lot to Lakefield. and enriched a lot of lives. I have to tell another interesting little anecdote that when I was working in the store, in the China department, the ladies there were Marion Millage, and Helen Rose, and Margaret Leonard. Margaret Leonard worked in the China department for 7 years, and then she started her own ladies' clothing store near Hamlin's, and did that for a number of years. So those ladies really were just wonderful to work with, and they enjoyed going to the shows in Toronto and picking out items for the store. Well, at the time I was working there as a teenager, in the hardware part, I remember Jim Galvin, Tam Grant, who was Bill Grant's son, Rick Nichols, and then Morley Brown and Jerry Ireland were there more as the adults there all the time. Well, one of the evenings that, at the end of the day, well, we used to always enjoy having, I don't know how many remember Barbara Bonnell.
Yes.
Barbara Bonnell and Mrs. Bonnell were just the most interesting people that I ever met. I just was fascinated. And every time Barbara would come in, there'd be a lizard or something around her neck. I could never figure out what it was. But one time she came in and purchased things, and my father said at the end of the day, Sandy and Tam, I want you to deliver these things to the Bonnells. Well, out we went to the farm, and we knocked on the door, and Barbara answered, and the kitchen was just filled with animals. They're running everywhere, every kind of animal you can imagine, rare, whatever. Woo, there they went. And everyone was sitting on the floor in a circle with a candle in the center singing, and Gordon Lightfoot was playing the guitar. So I just sort of stood there and thought, this isn't like my house. This has really got a little bit of life to it. So after I left, then I wasn't really around enough to follow as much who was working in the store. But I did go through some of my things and make a list of some of the people that I knew worked in the store, and I'm sure you'll be able to add to it. Just after I had worked there, Jeff McCracken, who was Dick McCracken's son, and Jeff's my cousin, and Donnie Yale, they worked in the hardware store. But going way back, to begin with, in the early days, the 4 Sabatino boys, John, Tony, Joe, and Louie, worked in there. Tony went to Chicago and worked in the hardware business. John worked in the Nephilim mines, and Joe was killed overseas. These are some of the other names that may twig a memory with you. There's Alvin Graham, Roy Robinson, Charlie Ridpath, Gordon Crawford, Don Millage, Harold Watson, Mrs. Bruce Dunford, Mrs. Herb Knox, Mrs. Doreen Armstrong, who was Doreen Kelly, and then Margaret Leonard, as I said, that was there for 4 years. So, oh Lord, I am long-winded, but the store has many, many memories. And I'm sure that each of you have some special ones, and I would love to hear about them. Also over here, we've been able to find some pictures of the store at the different levels as it worked along. It even has an old gas pump in front of it at some time. So maybe when you look at them after having heard some of the information, it may sort of just tweak your memory. So it's been a pleasure for me to do this. It's brought a lot of smiles to me, and I hope that you've got some memories that have smiles too. So now it's time for you to use that paper and pencil. Don't worry, this isn't a big one. So, does anyone still need a paper and pencil? Okay, one more.
No, I'm okay.
Oh, yeah,
I got my
oh,
own.
you're so
I finally
organized.
figured it.
I'll use yours.
This is something that I just thought would be a lot of fun to try. And it's just something that you do personally on your own, and you don't have to show it to anybody, and you don't even have to talk about it. But I went through a catalog, 1901. And I went through a catalog, 1976. And I thought it would be kind of fun for us to try and guess the prices of some items. So I'm going to name an item, and these are all going to be for 1901. And you can write down what you think the price is. And then for everyone that you got in the ballpark, well, that's a point for you. So here we go. This is all 1901. What would be the cost of an oil lamp with a glass chimney? Now, it can have a range, because we do understand it could be large, medium, small, but
Cost of what?
an oil lamp. I think they might have been called hurricane lamps.
Single ladder.
Oh, yeah, coil lamp, yeah, yeah. So has everybody written the price down? You ready to hear what it is? Okay. It ranged in price from 25 cents to 51 cents. So if you were in that range, bonus.
I got $3.
All right.
Would be worth
1901, a pair of dressmaker's scissors.
Dressmaker's scissors.
3 cents.
Again, there's a range because they can come in different sizes. All right? And the price ranges from 50 cents to 90 cents. So if you're in that range. Now, this is one in 1901 that every wife would have kissed their husband for. A carpet sweeper. 1901 carpet sweeper.
Thistle.
This, personally, I'd rather have the person come and do it myself.
Oh dear.
All right, now here's the price. Again, it ranges from the ordinary to the deluxe, but the range is $1.50 up to $3.25. And this is one that every handy-dandy outside place needed outside in 1901. A 26-inch saw. 26-inch saw.
More details, please. What kind of saw?
Oh, beats me.
Pruning?
Oh no, just a saw to saw.
Hands up.
Hand saw. Yeah, hand saw. That's right. You can tell I didn't go buy one. The price? $1.75. Now, this is referred to as a steel carpenter hammer. A steel carpenter hammer in those days came in 3 sizes, so you can have a price range for a steel carpenter hammer.
What's a hand? The handle was wood, surely, in 1901.
Could be. Okay, now, the prices given, and you can be within this range, 35 cents, 45 cents, 60 cents. Doorstop. I'm not sure, I don't think it's fancy, it's just a doorstop. I'm not giving you much other information on that. But just an ordinary plain Jane doorstop is selling in 1901, 3 cents. Now, for all the gardeners who went to the hardware store in 1901, pruning shears. 3 different sizes of pruning shears. So if you're within this range of 3 different sizes. Okay, pruning shears, 30 cents, 50 cents, $1 for the largest. Bet you could do that just as well as a yard sale now. 1 sheet of sandpaper,
One big penny.
and the winner is 1 cent.
1 cent.
But it would be a big one.
What was it?
A sheet of sandpaper.
Now,
Santa.
because everybody had wood stoves and fireplaces, you would go to the hardware store and buy a short handle fire shovel. For how much? Okay,
50 cents.
4 cents in 1901.
Oh, that's not
Now, if the fire was hot and mighty, you may be safer with a long handle fire shovel. So how much would you pay for a long handle fire shovel? Well, small one was 4 cents, but the long one was 10 cents. Well, if you want to take the chance and not get burnt, then stick with the 4. Now, something they sold a lot back then in the hardware stores were bird cages. Now, you are going to buy a large bird cage for a very large bird.
Still 1901?
Yep, still 1901.
Can I have my change back? I overbid.
Yeah, go and spend it now. Okay, you're going to buy a large bird cage. And how much are you going to pay? $1.35. Yeah, pretty fancy. And now back to the lives for the poor women. God bless them. They sure didn't have all the modern conveniences, so they had to go, or their husband went and bought it for them, a wooden wash tub. Oh, wooden wash tub. They came in different sizes, so you can have about 4 different price ranges and you'll be okay. A wooden wash tub that did not leak. And how much would you pay in 1901 for the little woman? Oh. Okay, small one, 50 cents. Next size, 60 cents. And 70 cents, and the big one was 80 cents. So, now, this is something I would have bought, because I sure would have needed it. I would have gone to the hardware store and bought a 6-foot step ladder. 6-foot step ladder, 1901. Okay. $1.10. So we have a winner in the range over here. Well
You
done.
heard me.
Yes. $1.10. Now, this is one for all the athletes and the boys that love to go out and skate. You are going to go and you're going to buy a pair of tube skates. They actually had them, 1901. Tube skates. Wow.
CCM.
This is quite surprising. Tube skates? $5. They weren't even going to be joining the NHL then. Now, for the younger boys that love to go out and play hockey on the river or the rink or whatever, they would buy boys' steel hockey skates that buckled on. You put your boot on and you buckle it onto the steel portion below, okay? So those are referred to as steel hockey skates. Now, the tube ones were $5. And these ones, 45 cents. I guess we know what most of the boys had to wear. And now, one last one, 1901. A cook stove using wood. And I'm envisioning about 4 different sizes of cook stoves. And a lot of them appeared quite ornate then, just because they're not ornate now. So just a round figure would, for a cook stove in 1901. There was 4 sizes, so I'll give you 4 prices, starting with the economy one. $9, $11, $13, and another one that was $17.50.
Wow.
So, did you spend all your money?
It was $1,000 today, each of them.
Now,
And you only got 10 cents an hour.
that's right, with 10 cents an hour. All right, now, 1976. Haven't we really improved since 1901? Well, I still need that 6-foot step ladder. So, how much am I going to pay in 1976 for a 6-foot step ladder? Well, you would pay $21.99. Big change. Now, you are going to purchase just a very plain, ordinary table lamp that would be about 28 inches high. Not ornate at all, in a very plain shade, but it will give you light. So just a table lamp.
Electric.
Electric, yes. Not the oil anymore. And in 1976, just a very plain Jane table lamp would cost you $37.99. Highway robbery. Now, if you didn't have a table and you still needed a lamp, how much would you pay for a floor lamp that would have the tri-light? A floor lamp in 1976, which we still have in our houses. Well, the table lamp was $37.99, and the floor lamp, $54.99. That's still a lot of money. And now for the painter in the family. It's time to change that color of paint in the bedroom. So, 1 gallon of wall latex paint, just 1 gallon.
Water and stuff.
Yep, latex wall paint, 1 gallon. You would pay $5.99 for the gallon. And now for the women in the household, they need a whistling tea kettle. A whistling tea kettle. So it's not electric, you're just going to put it on the stove and it's going to sing you a tune. And you would pay $5.99 in 1976. Now, one thing I always remember in our home, and maybe it's why we always had those chrome tables, but if you had the roast on Sunday night, then you took the remains of it and you put it in that meat grinder that hooked onto the side of the table. And you cranked away and hoped that you didn't crack the table. So how much would you pay for a meat grinder? I don't think I'd put that on someone's beautiful new dining room table now. You would pay $8.98. And when you finish doing the dinner, then you're going to go ironing and you need an ironing board. Now you can get an amazing range of an ironing board. You can go to the very basic up to the ultra modern. So any price you put down could be in the ballpark, really, because it's an amazing range, from the basic one to the best. A basic ironing board, 1976, would cost you $8.99, and the best one, $29.98. Well, they can keep that one. I'm not getting that one. And they still had carpet sweepers, so you know what you spent in 1901. So what would you spend now in 1976 for a carpet sweeper? I'll give you a price of an economy one and then a price of the deluxe one. Okay, a carpet sweeper, the economy, $12.99. The best in the lot, $31.99 in 1976. I hope it makes supper too. And the last, a 30-inch stove.
30 inch.
A 30-inch, we call it Ranger stove.
Wood, electric?
Electric. Yeah, 30-inch electric stove. White. You would pay $319.99. Now, it came in other colors. How much do you think it cost to get it in a color instead of plain Jane white?
$10 more.
Did you buy one? $10 only. Now, I want you to write down 2 colors. What were the favorite colors for appliances in 1976? Fridges and stoves. All you gotta do is look at people's cottages. 2 favorite colors. Harvest gold.
Avocado.
And avocado
Yeah.
green. Yeah. So, just on your own, you can count up the winners. And so, did you do better shopping in 1901? Were you really into that time, or were you really into 1976?
I didn't take care of you ever.
Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. It's time now to have some coffee and cookies and look at photos. Does anybody have an anecdote to share?